Thank you, Miami, for the last 3 years in this amazing city. The whole world shut down, but Miami welcomed us with open arms. We want to show Bitcoin to the whole world. We are taking the conference on the road to set the stage for Bitcoin in a new city. Nashville. Bitcoin 2024 is coming to Nashville in Tennessee, a city that is known as a music and freedom city. Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville from July 25th to 27th.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the show, Fed Watch, your source for everything Bitcoin and macro. My name is Ansel, Lindner, and I am joined by my co-host CK and a special co-host Nolan. So it is a big day today. How are you guys doing?
I love life. Who could complain? These are the greatest days that we've ever known. These are the historic days of Bitcoin's ascent. So we're having a great time here. We're going to be talking about all the amazing high quality research that's come out in the past couple of days now, right? We've seen our first story. We're going to jump right into it, but the KPMG stuff, and then you got the BlackRock study with their conservative 85% allocation advice for Bitcoin portfolios, and you got the TD Cowen report as well, saying, yeah, it's probably the best thing in the world. So we're loving life. Who could complain?
CK?
Can't put it better than Nolan, man. Loving life. And I was just telling Ansel and Nolan that honored to be on the show with both of them, both currently my favorite analysts. So I tune into Nolan almost every single morning. And then every time Ansel drops a podcast on Bitcoin and markets, I tune into that. And then when I'm not on FedWatch myself, I listen to FedWatch, usually done by these gentlemen. So excited to get to do FedWatch with the three of us. I think this is the first time ever. And we got a jam-packed show. Of course, I'll be remiss to not plug Bitcoin Amsterdam right at the front here, October 12th through the 13th. We are dropping dope speakers every single day. So follow us on Twitter, follow us on our email list, stay up to date with everything that's happening. You can go to b.tc/conference/Amsterdam and you can see the entire speaker lineup. Nolan actually works on the speaker lineup. So, Nolan, maybe you can tease a little bit about some of the strategy and thinking when it comes to putting together this lineup in Amsterdam.
Yeah, we don't want it to be just a retread of the show we do in Miami, right? We want it to be focused on a lot of regional issues, especially what's going on in Europe, especially the huge lack of energy literacy on the continent. There really isn't a show where people can go and talk about energy and how complex yet uniform and harmonious those energetic systems can be, the grid can be, especially with Bitcoin added to it. So it's probably going to be the largest gathering of energy literate and financially literate people in the world, or at least in that continent. So that's something that could be used on that continent. So we're looking forward to it.
Right.
Not too much to announce as far as speakers. I mean, we've had a few really, really high quality ones. We have some big names coming up, but give me a couple more days to announce them. They're going to be amazing.
No, they definitely will be. I've been watching the teaser video, and I think that people are going to get pumped by one in particular. But we're not gonna spill the beans on the show here. Ansel, any housekeeping on your end, sir?
Oh well, just the topics for today are the senior loan officer survey that the Fed puts out. I think this is, along with like CPI and the PCE, this is probably the most important metric that we can look at. So we're going to dig into that. And of course, Bitcoin mining has been in the headlines being the only real ESG. So all other ESG seems to be fake, but Bitcoin is turning out to be the real ESG. So we're going to be talking about that. I wanted to get some more of Nolan's takes on why 2024 is going to be so bullish, because I watched his show this morning and he got me hyped up. So I wanted to pick his brain a little bit on that. And then lastly, next Thursday is the next CPI drop. So I'm going to do a real quick preview for that at the end. So that's what we have lined up for today. If that sounds interesting, guys, like, comment, subscribe, share this stream out. We should be going out on Rumble now, but we're going out on Rumble, YouTube, Facebook, all those places. So share it with people if you like this content. That's what I got up front here. Any other housekeeping, guys, or should we jump into the charts?
I'm ready for the charts, man.
Let's do it. I'm just about to give a little X post shill. They're not tweets anymore. They're posts on X.
Yeah.
So I think people are moving towards what we call them on Nostr, which is posts as well. So a little bit of Overton window shift there. Let's jump into the charts, like you said. You got the Bitcoin daily first up here.
Yep. Bitcoin daily is first up, and man, we are squeezing very low volatility period. We actually, on the weekly chart, we are at pretty much the lowest volatility that we've ever had in Bitcoin's history. If you look at the B bands, the Bollinger Bands, they are very, very tight. The tightest they've ever been in history. The daily chart, you can see we're kind of going up in this trend. Maybe we're going to break out of that 31,000, but we're getting closer to the end of this pattern. So we'll see what happens. If we go the weekly, it puts it in a bigger context here. You can see where that pink bar is coming from. Next slide. There's CK. There we go. So you can see where that pink bar is coming from, or the red bar that has been acting as resistance. Above this, there isn't really much. Some people are talking about 35,000 being a resistance. I don't think so. It's just, this is a psychological level based on this chart right here and based on where we are in the bull market. But once this breaks, I obviously see it breaking to the upside, not the downside here. But once this breaks up, I think we have clear skies ahead. What are you guys' thoughts on price action over the last week and these charts?
Nolan, you want to go first?
Yeah, these Bollinger Bands and this low volatility, when's the other historic time that they were this docile, let's say? Was it 2019, or are we falling into a 4-year cycle frame here easily?
Well, there was a period after COVID, when we made the bounce back from COVID, and right before the halving, it was very, very tight. Right before we dropped down in 2018, remember in 2018, after we had the blow off top, we consolidated and everybody thought it might be going up, but the bottom fell out. But right before that bottom fell out at 6,000, it was very, very tight. Not as tight as today, though. Today is the tightest that Bollinger Bands have ever been, meaning volatility is extremely suppressed on the weekly.
Yeah, because those were the days when it was like, I'm in the 7K gang and I'm in the 8K gang. Remember that thing, like 8K gang guys here, and it went on for weeks and $1,000 sort of reference rate. And I mean, that's kind of what it is. It reminds me of that. It's like the boring price action. Just feels like everyone's trying to gather their powder and a little bit of calm before the war feeling again.
Absolutely. CK?
Well, I guess my question is, do we get rejected off of the support, or do we break up? What are the chances here? Things still feel weird to me. Like, I don't feel like this just overwhelming sense of bullishness around the price. And every time I wake up and I look at my block clock and it's like $29,200, I'm like, it's again, the chances of it going back down is just increased a little bit more. That's kind of my take. I'm curious what y'all think about that.
Well, I think that there is almost no chance of a sustained downward movement. Yeah, we could see a wick downwards or something like that to flush out all the longs. But man, oh man, all of the headlines are so positive. They're so positive that we didn't even dream that they could be this positive this quickly. Like, if you go back in time to 2016, 2017, we thought they were going to be fighting us. And now it turns out that everybody loves Bitcoin. And so I don't see that there can be a sustained down move out of this. I think the next range is going to be higher. Nolan, thoughts?
Yeah, it looks like the way Bitcoin is being discussed right now, and I go back often to the launch of the Libra scam that Facebook had in 2019. And what I saw with that immediately was what was amazing about it. Of course, this is where the word shitcoin becomes like popularized or normalized. Of course, Meltem Demirors saying it on Congress floor that day. And if you remember what happened when Libra came out, is the contrast. Bitcoin looked great in comparison to what they were talking about, and you saw this real vivid contrast. But you knew the whole game was out on the table, right? There was no hiding Bitcoin and what it could do anymore. Everyone understood from what happened in that testimony that this was for the whole game. This was the actual whole board being played at once, and there was no more, oh, this is a tech platform or whatever. And what I see today is sort of that thing happened, right? Now you're seeing it judged by, like, we're going to talk about KPMG, one of the big four, like we saw with BlackRock. And as we've seen up and down the board now, it's being talked about exactly as Hillary Clinton warned everyone in her Thanksgiving address in 2021. This could be devastating for nation states and can completely change how we organize society. And it's being discussed that way. This isn't science fiction. This isn't some nerds with a plan anymore. This is some real folks telling us that there is a major battle taking place for how we organize ourselves. And the largest allocator in the world has said, we should be organized 85% like these Bitcoiners. And
that is insane, honestly. That's one of the most insane things about that. I think that's the most bombshell element. And I heard that report actually came out last year. It was more of a private insiders report, and now it's just becoming more public, which is kind of crazy to think. But I'm kind of curious. Ansel, you talked about, there's so much good news, right? Obviously, the largest capital allocator in the world and money manager, BlackRock, is now playing the Bitcoin game. Does that just confirm that this is still a bear market, that there's all this good news and yet, price isn't reacting to it? All news is bad news in a bear market in terms of price. So doesn't that confirm that we're still kind of in this bear trend?
Yeah, I see what you mean there. In a bear market, it's supposed to be, the good headlines don't matter, and in a bull market, the bad headlines don't matter. But that could be it. But look, we bottomed. Do you think we're going back to 16K?
I don't know. I have repeatedly said that right now kind of feels to me like in 2019 when the Bitcoin price went from 3K to 14K and then it went back down to 3K. We tested the lows again. Talking about cycles, I kind of feel like we're still there. So that's my bearish bent to kind of how I'm looking at this chart. And if we like throw up at resistance here, when this triangle point meets, and we're unable to break up into clear skies, I could see that definitely cascading back down. Both of y'all talked about long-term, the paradigm shift. I'm fully aligned there. I'm strictly talking about like what's immediately in front of us in terms of price action.
I guess it would make sense if you thought that some of these big guys need to get shaken out. Maybe they're going in, starting to go into Bitcoin, dip their toe into Bitcoin, and then it drops to 20K, and they're like, "Oh crap! Now we got to sell," and then they miss it because then it goes back up. So I can maybe see that, but overall, the fundamentals to me, like all the Bitcoins leaving exchanges, people like Sailor issuing more shares to buy more Bitcoin. Tether
buying so much Bitcoin.
Tether, I think, bought 60 billion. What is it? $60 million of Bitcoin a month in the last 2 quarters. So that is like a constant buy pressure for Bitcoin as well. I mean, I just don't see where the Bitcoin is going to come from to dump right now.
And in my view, what's valuable right now is this sort of, it's more like this. these things come out about Bitcoin in the low periods like this because it's actually Bitcoin surviving the downswings that is most impressive to the smart people, right? That understand what's going on in the world. Anything can hit a hype cycle. Anything can catch on and be popular. You know, the terrible music can catch on, terrible jokes can catch on, but very few things catch on, then die, and then come back. Many people, many real Wall Street people peeled into Bitcoin already when it survived $10, right? That was a major thing that people dumped, cashed in, did whatever, rug pulled, scammed around Bitcoin, and then it came back. And we heard that again, right? We heard real Wall Street people enter the environment when Bitcoin bottomed at $250 in the 2014 crash. The same thing, you heard it again coming out of COVID, that Bitcoin didn't die when it hit the $20,000 2017, 2018 market high. And again, that's what impresses the smart people, right? It's its ability to survive. And this was probably its greatest tight wire act that it's ever done. I mean, it survived the main thrust, whether you like to hear it or not, Bitcoiners, guess what? Crypto was the first industry that treated Bitcoin as the reserve currency, as the de facto savings instrument, right? And we're still dealing with that right now. That's what we saw this week with Bitcoin, the curve bonded AMM breaking, and they're dumping Bitcoin into the market. So Bitcoin is still attached to this vestigial industry, this thing that is a real thing, right? Maybe the scams are it's full of scams, of course.
They're real scams, yeah.
It's a real thing, right? So
hey, the scams have money, and in 2019, it was the Plus token scam that dumped Bitcoin's price back down.
And every time Bitcoin separates from that, that's what I think got people like BlackRock or others to notice again this contrast. The contrast is important, and now that you're seeing it in real time, that it survived again, like I said, probably its greatest tight wire act, probably, right? The SBF and the debacle and the everything, that Bitcoin can come back from that after shedding all of these mentally handicapped participants. It's a great thing, you know.
And it only fell 75% this time, right?
Yeah.
versus 85% the last two times. So yeah,
we also didn't have that 100x.
True.
So you know, be careful what you wish for, right?
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more about some of this big news. So Nolan, you mentioned this, the KPMG, they're one of the top 4 auditing firms in the world. They're in 145 countries with over 265,000 employees, and they came out with a report. You can see here on the screen, Bitcoin's role in the ESG imperative. I have a couple other slides here. Let's pull those up. The next one. And I was going to actually underline some of the important wording in this next slide because it is kind of wordy. But basically, they're saying that Bitcoin, like in the second paragraph here, on the surface, Bitcoin does not emit direct emissions, also referred to as Scope 1 emissions, just like electric vehicles. And that is what Pierre Rochard was saying, you know, when he went and he held the CO2 detector next to the miner and people were laughing, right? Like the mainstream.
That meme propagated so fast.
The mainstream, they were laughing at Bitcoin. But look, now one of the top 4 auditing firms with over 200,000 employees in 145 countries is saying the exact same thing. If we go to the next slide, it gets better the longer that you read this piece. So the next one here is summing up some of the, what is this? This is the environmental stuff. So between Bitcoin's flexible demand load, ability to co-locate next to renewable energy sources, use of underutilized energy supply, and its ability to assist in reducing emissions, Bitcoin miners can be a useful ally in the transition to more renewable energy sources and reduce emissions despite its significant energy consumption. Now, I know I'm not a big believer in the climate crisis, but look, the people that are saying that Bitcoin is good, and the people that aren't caring about it say Bitcoin is good too. So it's just like I've said for so many years, Bitcoin aligns incentives, and look, it's aligning the incentives with the climate alarmists and with the more common sense people. So we have more here, but what do you guys think of this, specifically emissions?
I'll pass it to Nolan, but I just have, I've been saying this over and over again, but you can't be a real environmentalist a serious environmentalist unless you embrace Bitcoin. Like, it's just a LARP unless you embrace Bitcoin. And they're starting to see that, Nolan.
Yeah, there's two big things that happen with this. The first is of course, they're spreading energy literacy, which we're totally in favor of. But the second thing is something Bitcoiners predicted for a long time, that the big four would finally turn their research onto Bitcoin, and not the lament that a lot of Bitcoiners had where they could just hide in a blockchain corner and say, oh, we're going to modify it our own way and it's going to be great. This is them actually talking about Bitcoin, not the other things, not the idea, not the engineering, not any of that stuff, not an experiment they're going to launch, Bitcoin itself. So that's a big deal. And then the second part about the ESG thing, so ESG, as far as I can tell, is falling apart as a scam globally. It's not really an investment filter, let's say, precisely because people are becoming energy literate. They understand now that there was a study that came out just today. I read it on The Breakup, and it was that all ESG scores are stupid. They don't make any sense, and that the tobacco companies have better ESG ratings than Tesla, and none of it makes any sense. Like, tobacco companies are actually emitting some form of smoke, right? They're doing all kinds of stuff, but they call it green because it's plants, I guess, because it's like growing in the soil or something. So the whole thing is falling apart because energy literacy is getting better in the world, and because energy literacy is increasing, and Bitcoin is a big part of that. We're getting less and less worried about how Greta is feeling, more and more interested in how to pay for energy systems and how to do that, right? Because to this day, the problem with nuclear energy is the economics. The economics are still a problem. Like, it works, but we got to know how to pay for it. And until we figure out how to pay for it, and it's not just from the nation state, and it's all from taxes and all of that stuff, that's what Bobby Kennedy has been saying for a while now, that his only complaint about nuclear energy is you can't get it insured. If we can get it insured, and if the business model makes sense, it's going to proliferate. It's going to proliferate.
Well, isn't nuclear also going to get cheaper with this superconductor stuff?
Yeah, I don't even know if it's about nuclear. I don't think you need nuclear if it comes down to this stuff. If this is real, I think what you get is, Quebec, for example, could put up a couple dams, and we can get it to California at that point, the energy.
Yeah, so I think they can build the shielding in the nuclear plant. It's better for that, cheaper.
So. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's if this is real, we won't be able to track the innovation anymore. So I don't think it's worth even spending. Like, the flying cars are here next week, right?
This is why no one is bullish enough.
No
one is bullish enough. It's impossible to be bullish enough. And I mean, I've been trying to grok, what does it mean? This is a completely different subject, but what does it mean for Bitcoin mining and the incentives around that if the ASICs no longer produce heat? If all of that compute happens at room temperature, completely different situation. A lot of constraints just completely changed.
Bob Burnett, he's a friend of my podcast, Bitcoin and Markets. He has a podcast. It's like Old Man Yells, I think is the name of the podcast or something.
Yeah.
And he is a miner in the space. And so he had an episode about what this superconductor means. So go look up Bob Burnett on Twitter, and you can see that whole show. But guys, let's get in more of this KPMG stuff. So if we go to the next slide, this is the social benefits that they talk about. So they don't just stop at ESG. Well, ESG is social too, right? Environmental, social governance. But the social benefits they point out here is money laundering is minimal compared to the USD and altcoins. And they had a really nice chart showing all the others as a percentage of usage of like money laundering. And here's Bitcoin way down at the bottom. I mean, it stands alone as not being used for illicit activity, which is kind of interesting. If you stay on that one. Yeah, there we go. Cross-border payments.
Did you provide the chart?
No, I didn't cut that out, but I will link in the show notes to the report, and you guys can go check that out. Cross-border payments, they say they'll help that. Rapid relief funding. So they used Ukraine as an example that they raised $70 million within like a week or two at the beginning of the war, which is a use case for Bitcoin, they say. Monetize microgrids to bring electricity to rural Africa. That's a social benefit, and also financial inclusion by routing around, and get this is a direct quote, to escape authoritative and corrupt government regimes. That is a Bitcoin statement right there by KPMG, and it is insane. So that is the social benefits, and I do have one more slide here.
And what's amazing is that KPMG can be directed to Canadians, you know?
Say that again?
That whole thing, that escape authoritative and corrupt government regimes,
Yes.
That's good for Canadians. we were the actual example in this epoch, right? You know, how many Canadians learned firsthand the troubles of this stuff? So it's not just some like, oh, you're off in wherever land. It's here for real. Like,
yeah, and it's still happening. Look at in the UK with Nigel Farage or whatever his name is. He was just I heard that they're closing down 600 accounts a day in the UK. So I mean, it's a pretty big problem. If we go to the next slide, this is about Bitcoin governance, and you know, this could be out of a Bitcoin blog in 2014. So Bitcoin's governance is built into the system by design through rules that are coded into the protocol. This results in a system that cannot be abused or misused by those in power or even individuals with ulterior motives due to its decentralization. And again, this is one of the most important companies in the world saying this about Bitcoin and ESG. So guys, that's what I have from this. Any other comments on this?
Love it.
I mean, yeah, it's fantastic. You know, I want to give another shout out to BTC Policy Institute. I've mentioned them many times on this show, but their core thesis is that, hey, if we create peer-reviewed, you know, university level, research level, educational content, that will be used and cited and leveraged to create more of that style content that can actually be used to communicate to stakeholders outside of, you know, Bitcoin enthusiasts. You know, how do you take the ideas that are in the mailing list, ideas that are on the cypherpunk list, ideas that are in Bitcoin magazine in these circles, how do you communicate it to the KPMGs of the world? And I think that, you know, the results speak for themselves. You know, a year and a half into their project, you know, we're seeing a complete shift, and maybe it was inevitable, but you know, I do think that that the kind of group effort to make Bitcoin more digestible for this group of people is definitely having a massive effect, and it's going to continue to snowball.
Absolutely, absolutely. Nolan, anything to add to this before you did say earlier about all the bad ESG rankings, and I haven't. The next story is about that. But do you have anything specific?
Yeah. Let's go into those, because those are just too funny, right? It's hilarious that all this is happening at once. Because I predicted, it's been about a year that I said ESG was going to become a punchline. So we're the joke, the bowling ball pins are about to fall here.
Yeah. So this was an article out of the Financial Times. Companies with good ESG scores pollute as much as low-rated rivals. If we go to the next slide, this is a chart from actually a second article, but it's showing inflows to ESG funds. And you can see back in 2020, you know, 2019, 2020, the excitement was growing. That's when we started hearing the first time started hearing all about this ESG and all these ESG funds. And just look what's happened since. They've had now their first 2 quarters, 2 out of 3 quarters here have been net outflows of ESG. So it does look like it is dying. If you go to the next slide, this is a quote I wanted to read, and I had to lean in here because the typing is real small. So to begin with, ESG funds certainly perform poorly in financial terms. In a recent Journal of Finance paper, University of Chicago researchers analyzed the Morningstar stability ratings of more than 20,000 mutual funds, representing over $8 trillion in investor savings. Although the highest rated funds in terms of sustainability certainly attracted more capital than the lowest rated funds, none of the high sustainability funds outperformed any of the lowest rated funds. That's a big statement. That result might be expected, and it is possible that investors would be happy to sacrifice financial returns in exchange for better ESG performance. Unfortunately, ESG funds don't seem to deliver better ESG performance either. So not only do they not perform better, they perform worse, but like financially, but they don't even do better on ESG. So guys, what are your thoughts on that?
It continues to remind me, the part, for all those who are watching who haven't read The Sovereign Individual, you got to read it. And there's a point at which they discuss the decay of the old church-based world, and they talked about how it was like another feast, another pilgrimage, and how all the efforts to alleviate poverty and alleviate trouble and alleviate anxiety and worries, that it was all looks so stupid in retrospect, right? Like as if another walking up a mountain was going to do something. So when I read this, it looks like we're reading that. It looks like we're reading what our children are going to laugh at about the old world and how they were going to change things and like fix the energy systems, because they're going to have a glorious energy system and the energy is going to be from the air and all this stuff. And they're going to wonder, like, these morons thought if they went and asked some Wall Street people to give them good advice, that they were going to do it and that they were going to get better energy systems after the really smart Wall Street people gave them the best advice, right? And that's what they were counting on. It's like counting on a priest that he's going to do just the right feast and the poverty is going to be gone. It's going to have just the right menu. It's going to be so good. And then there's going to be no more poverty. It's going to be gone, right? It's the same thing. It's the exact same thing.
Quantitative easing. Yeah.
Hey, I couldn't have said it better, honestly. Nailed it. And yeah, I mean, I just like to look back 95 years and then look forward 95 years. So, what did the world look like 95 years ago? I think we were probably in the midst of World War I. And then, what will the world look like 95 years from now? Impossible for our tiny brains to tell, but odds are quality of life will be much, much higher. And we'll be looking back and talking about how freaking stupid we were, how barbarous we were. And, I really do think like these headlines, this ESG mumbo jumbo, all the stuff we've seen really since 2016, it really is like, peak empire is falling type of a vibe.
Absolutely.
And
go ahead.
Yeah, even take a look at, I read a quote on the show this week from Bobby Kennedy's dad, because it was making the rounds, and it was Bobby Kennedy Sr. as he was running for president, talking about how he called it GNP, which is that rarely used version of GDP, the gross national product, very similar to GDP. But anyway, I forget the distinction. But just talking about what's counted in GDP and what a stupid metric it already is for economic development. And he's like, look, it counts like the napalm, right? It's got a lot of napalm in there. It counts the ambulance that goes and picks up the drug deaths. It counts like all these things. He goes, it doesn't measure happiness. It doesn't measure any of the things actually that we are proud about when we're American. And that's really what we're getting to here, right? When we see all these metrics they're trying to foist on us, like ESG, as if it's a measure of well-being. And even we're going to open our eyes to this idea of GDP and all this stuff is absolutely stupid. And that's one of the great things that Bitcoin offers us. It offers us a new way to actually measure the economy that you can't, in the same way they talked about the governance, the tool of the actual network in the end is just a way to measure the economy in a sense that would make sense to anyone who doesn't need to get a Series 7 Wall Street license just to understand what the hell you're talking about.
Everything that gets measured gets managed, right? And
we love that. Yeah.
GDP is like that. Also, GDP is succumbs to the broken window fallacy. So because it counts spendings, if you just would replace all of your existing infrastructure, it'd make your GDP go up. But of course, that means everyone is poor. Let's go on to the next kind of quote out of this ESG thing. And I want to just reiterate here that Bitcoin is the only real ESG, and they're finding out that all the stuff that they thought was ESG is not. So remember that context for this. So one of the most significant problems with ESG is that by applying unmeasurable factors to companies, such inevitable, sorry, it's really small writing. It inevitably leads to poor decisions. Environment or social issues may sound great as a talking point, but delivering on these goals can be extremely costly. Why are ESG funds doing so badly? Part of the explanation may simply be that an express focus on ESG is redundant. And that's a good point. So, businesses are going to do what's best for the company, and that tends to be taking care of the environment anyway. I've always said about the oil companies and stuff, people think, oh, they're greedy oil companies. These companies, they're greedy capitalists, but they don't want to kill their customers, right? They want the best for their customers so that they can keep buying the stuff. So ESG really is just redundant in the end. Let's continue here. There's also some evidence that companies publicly embrace ESG as a cover for poor business performance. So if you're doing poorly, oh, it's because we instituted some ESG thing, so love us and allocate us capital. But the rest you guys can read out loud, read to yourselves. And this is from the Harvard Business Review. Both of those last slides were from there. So this is not only KPMG, it's coming from Harvard, MIT with Jason Lowry's stuff. So, I mean, this is, guys, when I said at the beginning, everything just looks so bullish. It's the biggest names in academia, the biggest names in business. They're Bitcoiners now.
In Odell's words, we front ran all of them. So you can pat yourself on the back.
What I like about this one too is that it sort of starts suggesting how a lot of people and companies that involve themselves with the ESG scheme are like, it leads to them being liars, essentially. Like when they say poor decisions, what it means is they're more interested in this score thing. And they'll do anything, right? Because you got to that's their job now to fill this mandate, and you'll make decisions. Now, what they're saying is here just poor decisions. I think inevitably it means less honest decisions. It means
bad
all
business.
Kinds of stuff inside that no one wants to see, right? So that's I think a powerful statement.
So anything else to sum up this ESG topic, Nolan? I know this is one of your big things about mining and environment and efficient use of energy and stuff. So anything to sum this up, and then we can move on to the sluice data after that.
Yeah, I mean, the big route we have to walk through to get money and state separated is to actually join energy and money. And that'll do it, right? If we can more clearly bond energy to money, the way the US dollar did with its whole scheme of the petrodollar, but that was too limited and it actually just helped this nation state structure, let's say, organizing principle. So if we actually want to see this new formed practice of democracy where we rip the money out of the engine and it's run independent of that system and has a new feedback loop and all that stuff, if that happens, it's going to be because we couple up with these energy oligarchs and make them richer than they are now. And then I think it's the world we all imagined.
Awesome. All right, let's move on to what my favorite metric in the world of the Eurodollar or the world of money, and this is bank lending, because listeners of this show or watchers of this show will know that money is printed in the process of making a loan. It's not printed in QE or anything like that. So this is very important. The SLOOS is the Senior Loan Officer Opinion Survey. So they send out to thousands and thousands of banks, the Federal Reserve, and they ask these senior loan officers about their lending standards, about demand for loans, and all of this. Well, in a period of tightened lending standards, you're going to have less lending, and that means there's going to be more drag on the economy, right? And that is recessionary. If you just look at this chart, every time you go up, that means standards are tightening. And that happens around every recession, like a clockwork. I mean, it's almost a chicken or the egg question. Does the bad economy come first, or does the tightening lending standards come first? But as you can see, it's upwards of 70 or 80% of banks are tightening their lending standards right now in all of these different types of loans to small firms, commercial, industrial, construction, and land development, et cetera, et cetera. So things are getting tight. If we go to the next slide, that one is just commercial and industrial. The top one is going to be demand. So you can see demand is falling. People just don't want to take on more debt right now. They actually want to tighten their belt, maybe pay down their debt instead of taking out new debt. And the bottom one here is banks' lending standards are tightening. So All in all, this is a pretty big deal. I'm going to read a little bit from this report on the Federal Reserve's website. In response to the first set of special questions regarding the level of standards, banks reported that on balance, levels of standards are currently on the tighter end of the range for all loan categories compared with the July 2022 survey. Banks reported tighter levels of standards in every loan category. Regarding banks' outlook for the second half of 2023, banks reported expecting to further tighten standards on all loan categories. Banks most frequently cited a less favorable or more uncertain economic outlook and expected deterioration in collateral values and the credit quality of loans as reasons for expecting to tighten lending standards further over the remainder of 2023. I have some other stuff in here about the demand. So, of the banks reporting weaker demand for commercial and industrial loans, major net shares cited decreased customer investment in plant and equipment, decreased inventory financing, decreased merger and acquisition financing, and decreased accounts receivable financing as important reasons for the weaker demand. So across the board, the economy is getting weaker. People don't want to take out loans, and banks don't even want to lend to people. So when you have a slowdown in credit, you're going to have deflationary pressure, and we're going to see that. And this leads into my CPI preview for next week. But guys, what are your thoughts on this senior loan officer survey?
It was obviously done before the credit down rating that Fitch gave the United States yesterday. So I wonder how much more negative it would be if it was actually in the current environment, because none of this all will have some effect, right? It does influence the Federal Reserve in some sense, right? There's going to be some implications for interest rates. I don't know exactly what, but as I understand, this isn't as simple as, oh, we just lost some points internationally. There are knock-on effects to it. So I don't know exactly what they are, but I bet it would be even starker had we seen it with a bit of time delay between the Fitch announcement and this.
Yeah, it's a quarterly report. So this came out just, I think, this last week it came out. So they've been working on it for 3 months, and the downgrade is not really going to affect it. But yeah, that's interesting. I don't know what effect that will have. Perhaps that will have more collateral value effects. So in this write-up, they said that some of the reasons why they don't want to lend is because of the deterioration in collateral values, and that is bonds that they're holding, right? And as interest rates go up, the value of your bonds goes down. So that could have knock-on effects here as well. CK, any thoughts on bank lending?
I don't have anything to add, and yeah, I'm excited to get into the next subject.
All right, what do we got coming up then? That is well, we're pretty much finished, except for I wanted to pick Nolan's brain about 2024. Oh wait, yeah, we got some slides here. What was that?
No, we got some bond talk. Sorry, no, what we got? We got the 10-year bond, and then CPI, and we can talk 2024.
Yeah, actually, this ties in great with what we were just saying there about collateral, the value of collateral. So this is the 10-year yield. As it goes up, the value of those bonds goes down. And you can see we're trying, it looks like the yield is trying to break to new swing highs here on the 10-year. I don't know if it will. I have not, this has been a surprise to me. I thought that the yield would continue down, but we took a jog up here around March and April, and it hasn't come back down. If you go to the next slide, though, this is looking at compared to Bitcoin. And if we are getting close to a top in the 10-year, you can see that those tops usually correspond with bottoms in the Bitcoin price. So if you go back to when was that, 2018 into 2019, yields turned over and started coming back down, and that was at the bottom of the 2018 bear market. Then also the top just recently, that was towards the end of last year, coincided with the FTX sell-off, which resulted in the bottom that we currently have. So this is one of these correlations that I'm watching closely. Any thoughts on that, guys?
I mean, this is a crazy chart. It looks like a mirror, honestly.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy.
So if we do break to new highs, this would be in the camp of saying that Bitcoin price is going to come down. But if we start coming down, that is more recessionary. You know, like in recession, people flood into the safe and liquid instruments, and that is the treasury. But it's also Bitcoin. So that could be also a reason why they correspond here on the chart. So that's all I have for this. Nolan, let's jump into 2024. Well, go ahead, CK.
I was just about to say, like, you know, I love being right about my immediate price calls. So, you know, I think the 10 years can keep ripping, and that's bearish for Bitcoin immediately. So I hope that y'all are in position to stack sats, and that you always have a little bit of dry powder on the side.
Absolutely. All right, Nolan, break it down for us why you are thinking everything's coming to a head in 2024. And what did you call it this morning? That daddy's coming home or something?
Daddy's coming home from war, and he likes Bitcoin. Well, it's just the feeling that I have. You know, it's like the end of the Odyssey or Ulysses when he gets home and his home has been overcome, or the end of Lord of the Rings when the hobbits, in the book anyway, return to Hobbiton and Saruman has taken over. So it's the idea that there's just a certain lack of, let's say, equivocation of the game we're playing anymore. There's no getting away from the game that's being played. And because of what we've seen with the indictments coinciding with the Hunter Biden news, basically you're seeing the whole story. There is no more mystery about what's happening here. And because the picture is clear, and the story is so vivid and big, right, that there is this situation going on, that information is laundered in a certain way, and that the news, the real job of the news, the real actual job is to keep you from understanding the news, right? That is new, that people don't know that. And Bitcoiners figured that out years ago. And that's why Bitcoiners as a whole watch this show more than the mainstream media, because they know they're still wondering who's paying for the lights. Where did they get their makeup? Where did they get those wardrobes? Where did they get all this stuff? And why are they telling me about ESG constantly, right? So because this is such a big story, it sort of is moving to the point now. And the analogy I used this morning was the you know, that genre of YouTube video where you get the young people listening to some music they've never heard from the 60s or 70s, and then they're like, whoa, that's so good, like, holy cow, right? That's the greatest song I've ever heard. I didn't know, it's amazing. We're experiencing right now a whole bunch of people who, for the first time in their life, are understanding the news is not at all what they thought. And it's such a big change, and this is why I think it's so big for 2024. It's going to open minds to changing everything. Once you know that is a scam, the news business is what it is. And here's how we're going to know, because I think, you know, the current president is off the board. It's over, right? Whether you know it or not, or accept it or not, he's not going to participate in the 2024 election. He can't. Like, Trump will mince him into ground bone if he has to, because you're just dealing with a very powerful debater. But what's interesting is everything that's happened to Trump, and the coincidental Hunter, and then they indict Trump again, and they got another indictment for Trump. What's interesting about the coincidence, when you see the engine, when you can absolutely see the technique that's happening, what you find is that this is the modern form of assassination, really perfected with Watergate, or at least invented with Watergate and Nixon, how you assassinate someone who's giving you trouble. Because the one before with Bobby Kennedy's uncle was real messy. And I've said for a long time that the important frame for Bitcoiners, we get caught up in 1971 and the gold standard very quickly. But that's not really the story. The story is 46, when the whole thing becomes the global reserve currency the way it did with Bretton Woods. But more importantly, after, when they deputize the banking system to administer justice through that. And that happens in 64 as a result of what happened to John F. Kennedy and the start of the Vietnam War. And why are these protests happening, and what's going on here? And that's where Bank Secrecy Act starts. That's where this third party became not trustable. Right. That's where really the trusted third party aspect of Satoshi's paper becomes a problem. Before that, the banks were incentivized to make you rich, and they didn't want to run someone else's enforcement scam through their system, right? Even up into 2010, people would laugh when you said you need a driver's license to get a brokerage account. Are you kidding me? Right? Like that was an American, like I knew Wall Street people in my life that thought that it was insane already, and that was not even long ago. So you have this whole system that now we're going to see it, right? We're going to see Trump, it was a type of assassination that was done to him in 2020 and currently. Reputational assassination, of course, but people aren't buying it, and his numbers are higher than ever. And on the other end, you've got Bobby Kennedy, who is the other heir to the assassination argument that the political system, assassinated. So they both have this like moral case now to destroy the hypnotizers, the media apparatus. But consequentially, we're dealing with, like I said, a psychological commodity here. And go back to this BlackRock piece that we were talking about earlier. And when I mentioned the lows of a currency, the lows of Bitcoin are what impresses the smart people, right? That Bitcoin has traversed this whole era and is still here, as good as it ever was, and is more appealing than it ever was, just given all these foreign countries signaling what they're saying about America. We're not getting involved in your thing. We want new markets for energy. We don't care about your dollar. We're going to make this nuclear power thing happening globally is because America suppressed it around the world, right? And we know that for a fact. Saudi Arabia signed the deal. Saudi Arabia signed the peace deal with Iran through Chinese brokerage. Why? What was the carrot? China gave them nuclear energy. We would not give that to them. America would not give them nuclear technology. They would not build nuclear reactors because they were afraid of an arms race with the Iranians and blah, 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 Crimea River. The Saudi Arabians deserve to have nuclear energy just like the Indian people who invented it and made it in their system, and the Pakistani people and the Iranian people and everybody in the world. You see the French embracing it. You see all these other countries embracing nuclear energy now. Why? It's because America isn't there to tell them no anymore. And because you see that same BRICS story that we keep seeing, right? BRICS is coming in 2 weeks. More and more countries want to join. Now, their whole shitcoin ain't going to fly, but the expressed appetite for new markets and new venues to settle energy contracts on is big news for Bitcoin. And because of that, we can fill this void of expressed demand, right? There is an expressed global demand for new markets for energy, and whatever they cook up in Shanghai ain't going to work. So there's this incredible opportunity out there to do what it is we need to do. And that is settle all energy markets on Bitcoin. And this is a big thing. I agree. But where are people going to head after the deception that we see with what's happening in U.S. politics? Remember what we said a while ago, what Jerome Powell said, the U.S. system will work as long as the rule of law remains in place. Well, guess what? Your political opponent has been arrested 3 times. 4th is coming. And the son of the current heir or the regime or whatever is just a bit of a drug addict, and he's got some problems and blah, blah, blah.
Was that some foreshadowing by Powell?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, people give him a hard time because he's a legal guy and not a Wall Street guy, and I could see why you would, right? I can see why you would do that.
He's a lawyer for Wall Street, right?
Yeah,
so
and
look, in that world.
I was admitted to the United States as an economist for my own work visa, and I'm just a lawyer, right? So it's the same idea. I've always had to explain that to border officers, like, no, lawyers can be economists, right? In case you were wondering, and they're always a little suspicious. But so I'm a little sympathetic actually to Jerome Powell because he comes from that background. But I get why people say he shouldn't be in the chair and all of that stuff. So
are you saying that you're a spook?
Spook? What do you mean? I don't get it. A lawyer?
I mean, yeah. You're from the government, right?
No.
We like Powell on this show, and that's kind of it's not a popular opinion at all. I mean, I don't obviously like I'll always have to add the disclaimer that I wish there wasn't a Federal Reserve, but Powell is probably the best chairman that we've had in my lifetime. So I think that's an important thing. But hey, I wanted to mention something, get your opinion on this, guys. So what Nolan, you were saying there made me think of like a pendulum, that it's gone so far this way, it's got to swing back this way. I even noticed that in some of your comments about ESG, how early on you called that this was a stupid idea, it's not going to work, but they kept pushing that pendulum, and now it's going to swing back the other way. Can you tie that in to like the monetary argument for Bitcoin? Because I am going along with your 64-71 type of expansion of the Eurodollar system. The dollar gets pushed out by the banks. Credit is created everywhere. The global economy booms, and now we're at the end of this credit cycle. So I'm trying to think of like the pendulum is coming back on all this stuff, but it's also coming back on credit-based money, back towards a commodity-based money. And that's where Bitcoin fits into this whole conversation. Not only just the energy side, but from the monetary side. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's why on my morning show, I focus so much on the time preference piece. Ultimately, what I do this often when I just do the sort of, Bitcoin on the street type of thing, just meet strangers. What is Bitcoin really about? What is it all about? Right. Because I hear about crypto and all that. Do I have to be an investor? I said, that's the opposite. Right. What we actually want to do is just make saving and understanding what's happening in the economy easy again. And we want to lower the IQ for participation. We want to lower the psychological burden of participation in the world. Right. I saw Tur de Meester did a whole show on this recently about the cognitive benefit he gained from saving in Bitcoin, and it's been 10 years in his case, right? He just did a podcast on that the other day. And so the way I see it is we let the financial engineers dominate in an era where this debt-based instrument, which was super sophisticated, and we should always, just like the beginning of the fiat standard where Saifedean pays respect to the invention of fiat as we know it today in its early form before entropy had set in, and it actually achieved amazing things, right? Incredibly high participation in home ownership, incredibly high engagement of Americans in the national economy. But really what it comes down to is because these incentives are all warped now in the system, because it is created by financial engineering first, and because that has destabilized any understanding and use of the system, right? It can't be used as a measuring stick anymore because it was too easy in some areas, too hard in other areas, and did perverted things, right? Like create centralized farming because it returned money to shareholders. Your health was not important in that, right? Just like the car business, right? What's going on in the car business? Well, you're buying a bunch of pensions, you're buying a bunch of entitlements, you're buying a business model that's completely broken. There's no reason why a car should have 25,000 pieces in it, right? That's not built to last. That's built to fill a mandate to shareholders and a sales schedule and everybody else they're thinking about, except for the driver. They're not in the equation, right? So,
and the car companies have become banks. All of these things have been financialized.
Yeah. No one's building a car that's going to last. No one's building a phone that's going to last, or a computer. No one isn't incentivized to share a design spec that can be replicated easy at cost and will be beneficial and better for everyone. And that doesn't mean we need uniformity and all that stuff. It just means a platform on which we can build that would be easier. So that's really what's happened here, is that none of these systems align anymore, and it's created this psychological instability in the world. It's what's created the anxiety, and it's what's created this demand for a new way to make sense of the world around. And because Bitcoin is a psychological commodity, we can't forget that, right? Just like the dollar, it is when everyone tells you it's just made up, tell them I agree. It's entirely made up. It's totally made up. But the difference is it's easier to understand. It's a very simple system and can be used to measure the world around us in a way that anyone can access and anyone can get. And it can't be manipulated by anyone else. And therefore, it's a really useful ruler or measuring stick. And that simple quality, I think, is what allows us to use Bitcoin as a real simplifier of the world around us. And that simplification, I think, will lead to a shift in time preference from a debt-based, consumer-based economy to what commodity-based economies were about, which was preserving things, making them last forever, building to last, having a much different time horizon. And that's what we're trying to change here, right? And in the end, it goes down to everything. It goes down to how people interact and respect each other, and because that's where that's the problem here. What the reason why you have all these ridiculous business models on OnlyFans and all that is not because the technology was too permissive for the world. It's because the people are addicted to the dopamine, right? It has nothing to do with the technology. We just have to change how people are sort of calibrated, and only the money can do that.
Well, I have a one-word answer question, or question with a one-word answer. And so you were talking about if it is going that way, does it snap or does it deflate? Or is it like getting on a lifeboat? How do we go from this system, or how would you characterize going from this system to the Bitcoin system?
I think they're going to stabilize the dollar using Bitcoin exactly as our RFK has suggested. But it does turn, and I know Bitcoiners hate hearing it, but UBI is coming and CBDCs are coming, and people are going to sign up for them, right? The world coin, just accept it, right? There's people who are going to need it, but it will further debase the dollar in a sense. It will be Gresham's law in perpetuity. The US dollar. So Gresham's law, if people don't know, that the good money drives out the bad, which is that the bad money ends up being in circulation more and the good money gets hoarded more. And so you're going to see a situation where the Bitcoin is hoarded like silver dollars were when exactly in the 64 framework, right? Where the US, at the same time as they deputized the banks, they also diluted the money and got rid of the actual precious metal in it, and started creating the shitcoin quarters. So the Bitcoin hodl aspect will just become much more intuitive for way more people, and the US dollar food stamp system is going to be real. Except the food stamp system can't just be about everyone's imagination. There's going to be finally a feedback loop and some form of a realistic repayment of debts that were borrowed.
Yeah, I gotta jump in here. We gotta wrap. We're going a little bit over. I think this was a fantastic conversation. If you want to get both of these kind of perspectives and a lot of, at the end highlighted of Nolan's perspective, check out The Breakup, check out Bitcoin and Markets. Of course, check out FedWatch. That's where we all come together to talk about the global macro. This is the only show that does that we talk about global macro and Bitcoin. I think our thesis has been very, very accurate over the last 2 years. And in particular, we've been talking about Bitcoin being the new foundation for the global economy. And that doesn't necessarily need to be anti-dollar. That's been on this show probably longer than anywhere else. And we have two experts here talking about the dollar being backed by Bitcoin, something that sounds both preposterous, but also potentially the future. So I know someone else at Bitcoin Magazine, Mark Goodwin, is also thinking about this idea in depth as well. So something that we'll logically be talking about more here on the show. But with that, I want to wrap this one up. I'll be at Bitcoin Amsterdam October 12th through the 13th. Nolan is programming it. Ansel, he was fantastic at Bitcoin 2023. He'll keep bringing the highlights of everything in global macro here on the show. But for now, peace.